Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne. How are you this week? I'm sure you're hanging in there like we all are. So today I have a colleague. I met Dana about a year ago. Dana is a professional speaker like myself. I actually just got accepted in. She was the membership person that got me involved with CAPS, which is the Professional Association for Speakers in Canada. Dana actually knew someone in common, and we got connected that way, and we've been attending meetings for quite a while. Dana's done a lot of things, and I have a bit of a bio. So Dana, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Roxanne.
So Dana's, I'm going to literally be, it says becoming a badass. She's a bit of a badass in life and business. Being a badass in life and business requires you to stand in your power and be super comfy with being unique. Dana knows all about standing out and being unique. Her personal brand of the Inner Dominatrix, which is, everybody's thinking, oh, I can't wait to hear about that, pushes people out of their comfort zone, challenges their perceived notions that has them stepping into a fierce determination to rock their bold. And that seems like it should go with red shoes, Dana. Sexy, fun-filled lives. Dana is a two-time international #1 best-selling author, a two-time awards winning speaker, and Dana's commitment is to living life in command of her, I was going to say divine feminine, but feminine power, and helping others connect with her inner dominatrix has made her a sought-after speaker and coach. Wow. I like it.
Thank you.
So I know recently, Dana I just bought a copy of her book, and I have not read it, so I will say that up front. So okay. I have to get to that.
Absolutely.
So Dana just recently launched your book, so maybe we should start there, Dana.
Sure.
What's that? I know it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, it has been a whirlwind. Oh my goodness. Yeah. All of these things are like an epic undertaking. But so this is the first of a series, and the series is called the Inner Dominatrix Guide. And of course, this one is called Become a Badass in Business. So the book has been a journey for me personally, because in this book, I've brought in a lot of my personal story, a lot of the, stories from the dungeon. So, really kind of pulling back the kimono wide open and sharing all my vulnerability in the story, and, bringing the lessons of that world and how they relate to business, and how people can step into the mindset that they need to really show up and grow the business that they're looking for.
Now, until 50 Shades of Grey, none of us were talking about this kind of stuff, right? And then it became kind of, I'm going to use the word vanilla, because everybody was talking about it.
Yes.
So I want you to, I heard your story, and it was a year ago, to be able to represent our chapter in Ottawa. So it was a pleasure. I saw you and some other fantastic other speakers. So I have the pleasure of knowing your story. Or what was it, 5 minutes? That's all I got anyway.
I know, you just get a small little segment. So
and I'm like, okay, tell me more. So I have to get out and see your keynote sometime. So,
Absolutely.
Dana, I often say that, we all have a path. We have a story. And obviously you're saying that in your book, you're sharing that. Tell me kind of obviously you're speaking, you're coaching, you're doing lots of things out there. Where did your story begin?
It's been this evolution. People say, oh, where did it begin? I don't know too many people that have a really clear-cut beginning, but, to kind of walk people through quickly the journey. So when I graduated school, I was a massage therapist. And so that was back in 92. And over the years, my work evolved, and gradually, well, actually very quickly, I started to having to bring in energy work and psychotherapy because I found that was really what was going on for people. What was keeping them stuck physically was more what was in their head. And so my work progressed and evolved into more of a coaching model. And eventually I just realized, you know what? Really, I'm doing coaching and I'm being underpaid for it. So I decided to retire my license and go full time into coaching. Now that's one stream. Now along simultaneous with that, in 1999, I opened up a massage supply store and went through the journey of, having staff and inventory, and then eventually going through a bankruptcy and having to lay everybody off. And it's in that journey where I started to realize that the skills that I had in my personal life of being a dominatrix, which was, again, concurrent with all of these things, like everybody's lined up, right? So I was a dominatrix in my personal life and had a real strength going on there, but I wasn't bringing that into my business. And when I took a really hard look at why the business failed, beyond we had too much inventory, or we had staff making mistakes and, shipping the wrong product out, so we had to ship it out, ship it back, and ship it out again. The underlying piece was that I could see that I wasn't being the leader that was required. And the leadership skills I was leaving kind of segregated into my personal life and not bringing them into the business. And then with that, I started to look around at other women in business, particularly women. And I noticed that, there's a lot of women who do not stand in that power. They do not stand in that leadership in a way that's unapologetic and yet still quiet, soft, and feminine. And so I really wanted to bring this inner dominatrix as an archetype for women in business.
Amazing. So, most of us, females, you and I think around the same kind of age category. We grew up and at least I know and my family was like, yeah, achieve. But when you get out in the world, you get those implicit messages that say, oh, it's all well and good, however, there's that, what they say, the glass ceiling, it's really there, and you keep bumping up against it. So a lot of times what ends up happening, I remember when I was in corporate, I was always bumping up against it. And you're like, is it because I'm female? Is it, if I say too much, I'm quote unquote, the aggressive one, or the one of a bad word, the bitch. But I'd be doing no different at the corporate, table than my other male counterparts. So it kind of, after a while, you found your groove to be able to get done. And sometimes you would back off. I know I would at times. And because I'm the only one generally, maybe, or some women would, but when it came to kind of formalizing things, they'd back off.
Right. Yeah, it's a fine balance in that, women haven't been seen as, the leaders or assertive. And so when they do step up, they're afraid of being called a bitch. And for good reason, because, we have been when we stand up. And yet there are ways that we can lean into our feminine strength that calls people to task without being masculine aggressive. And I think it's when women get into the masculine aggressive energy is when they more likely get called a bitch, because it doesn't feel the same. But it's I think it's more of for me, one of the analogies is when you think about the stereotypical Black woman, mama, right? Don't nobody mess with mama. And it's that kind of energy. She is strong, she is feminine, and yet, you just know you do not pull anything with her, right? Because you're going to get a cuff upside the head. And I think if women, in business and in the boardroom were to actually pull a little bit more from that feminine strength, lean into it, people would show them more respect naturally, because it's not. You're not trying to copy what the men are doing. You're bringing your own authentic strength into the scenario.
Absolutely. I completely agree. But sometimes what ends up happening is it's difficult. You're trying angles, right? And I think that, I saw it, in the 15 years kind of in consulting, and sometimes it would be blatant. And then sometimes, you would see females above you. And I can think of, one particular female that was 2 ranks above myself at that time. And she was brutal,
Yeah.
and then you think, well, you're female like me. You're getting the same tide, except you're 2 up from me, kind of wanting to kind of, I guess, be able to relate, to be able to think that, you would kind of understand what it's like to be female, a female in the ranks. And sometimes, it was easier to deal with the males at that rank than it was that, and I'm not saying that of all, SVPs that are female, but in my opinion, the one that I was exposed to did it quite poorly.
Yeah, and it's challenging because realistically, women have only been in the workforce for 100 years, and moving up the ranks for probably the last 50 or 60 years. So we don't have a lot of history to draw on, and whereas men have had a very long history of working with other men, and they have developed this camaraderie, and here I'm going to mentor you, I'm going to pull you along. The women who were leading the way, I give them kudos. They had to fight and claw. And so, they probably were burnt out and didn't have anything left to give to the women who were coming behind them. Now, it was short-sighted, but I completely forgive them. It's like, how could you? Like, you have spent so much fighting and clawing. And I think the next generation that's kind of coming behind you and they're seeing where they need more collaboration. They need more mentoring. And in our generation, I see more women reaching down to lift up. And so I think that's going to change in the next 50 years. I think we're going to see a lot more collaborative, a lot more mentoring, and we need it. We absolutely need it.
So the burning question I have,
Mm-hmm.
which I'll go deep, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. As a dominatrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the translatable skills that you bring to the boardroom? And when you women, how do you kind of introduce those concepts?
Yeah. So here's what I see is, if we look at the dominatrix and turn her into an archetype, she is authentically confident, because when you step into the dungeon, the moment that you step in, you have to show up fully. You have to be holding this space, holding the energy, and holding that, presence. Otherwise, the submissive will not believe you. They can smell fear a mile away. It's like, you have to be on. There is no faking it. And I think that's a really big piece for business, is that, we've been taught for a long time saying, fake it till you make it. Faking it doesn't work anymore. And especially when you want to lean into a feminine power, that's not faking it. That is that quiet confidence in which you have to own it in your body. So that's probably the first one. Next one is in negotiation. So obviously, for people who know a little bit or have watched 50 Shades or read 50 Shades, there's a negotiation that happens prior to any scene. And we talk about what are you willing to do? What do you want to do? What do you never want to do? And then, and what do I want to do and what I never want to do? And you play within the zone of what overlaps. So you're negotiating, you're never compromising. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that's another piece, for corporate or for business, that women can really lean into not compromising anymore. Win, win, or no deal. Mm-hmm. And both of those skills, and of course, there's a bit more, but both of those skills require us to get to this place where we're letting go of the judgments of who we think we are, who we should be, how we think we're going to show up. And, the more that we untangle from those, all that burden of who, how we think we should be showing up. When we start to untangle from that, then we're free. We're free to move, and we're free to just, show up authentically, show up as us. And naturally, we're going to come from this place of negotiating with ease, because when we're not confined with what we think we should be doing or what we think we're going to lose and all those shoulds, then it's like, oh, let's just show up and play the game. It becomes easy.
Wow. That sounds like a nice place to be, right? It's kind of like when you go into the first time to a corporate customer or something like that. It's what I hear. You're ready. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but it's a bit of a poise, right?
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're going in with that perspective, you're kind of, you got your dress on, you got a presence, but really bigger than that, it's about the space that you're embodying when you're entering that situation to say, I bring value, I bring expertise, I'm here, bringing what I know I can help with, and I'm here to really understand you and not go right into, what I can bring to you, because it's like a win-win. If you're talking about that subset, which I love that word you used, of between the do's and the don'ts, and finding that part of the circle that says, really, on a corporate level, what are your needs? These are my offerings. What is your mission?
Where does it overlap?
Yeah. Mission, what's your vision? And if it's corporate culture, you're really it's helping you zone in.
Yeah, it really is. And you very quickly get to, are we a good fit? And if it's not a good fit, then you just say no, because trying to fit, that square peg in a round hole is trying to fit the client that's not the right connection into your services. So sitting down and just, objectively being able to go, am I able to serve you? What do you actually need? And what do I have that can work for you? And if not, who else can I send you to?
I like that, because, especially with, if let's say you're shifting arenas, like, if you're going, let's say you're starting to speak professionally, right? And you're going out there, you're kind of thinking, oh my God, can I do this? Can I, what presence am I bringing? All those things. But if you've kind of worked, what I hear just clearly, and you tell me, Dana, it sounds like a mindset.
Very much so. So it's a mindset that starts back a ways. So a lot of people talk about mindset, and you'll think about, even with the classic Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, right? That is in essence a mindset book. But for most people, it doesn't actually address what is getting in the way of you having that mindset. It's one thing to say, I'm going to think positive. I'm going to, see a good outcome, and, I'm going to muscle my way through this. Okay. So here's my thing about willpower. Willpower is useless. And if you think back to like grade 6 science, and you take magnets, and how you have magnets, and you try to push the two south poles together. And no matter how hard you push, they just repel at the same strength that you are pushing. That to me is willpower. So you can get close, but you'll never click. And you burn yourself out. And especially for women, we burn ourselves out pushing for willpower, instead of taking a step back and say, okay, well, why don't I get rid of what it is that's preventing me from showing up authentically, which is all of our internal judgments and the programmings and all the interesting, fun things of our monkey mind. If we eliminate those, then it's easy to show up, and you start to move into the place of feeling passionate about what you're doing. And then it's easy to engage the client or whatever it is that you're doing. Or it's easy for you to go in and ask for a raise or any of those things, because you're not pushing. And for women, it is vital, because the minute that you get into push energy, you repel everyone in the room. That magnet pushing them away, and they just, they flee. But when you flip the magnet around, you have the north and the south poles trying to click together. They just pull each other together, and it becomes easy. And that's what we want to move people towards is, ditch the whole push, hustle, and grind. Sorry, Gary Vee, I think you're totally wrong. And, being able to dig into our passion so that it propels us forward.
I like that example. That's a very nice example.
Thank you.
How many of us have done that? I know I've done that through my career several times, right?
Absolutely.
And then if you just kind of slow down and flip around a bit, all of a sudden then things start to flow. Now, with women, what are some of the biggest stumbling blocks that you find get in their way at achieving this kind of mindset?
I think two major things. One, I'm not good enough, comes up in any number of variations. So I'm not good enough for this job. I'm not ready. And, Cheryl Sanderson spoke about that in Lean In. The women will wait until they are 110% ready before they go for and apply for the job.
Mm-hmm.
So the I'm not good enough, it shows up. And then, two is this worry about being judged. And, again, this is like centuries of us as women being judged for our appearance, our stature. Are we good mothers? Are we bad mothers? Are we, should we even be in a job? And, again, this is fairly new world for us to be in the corporate world. And all of those, judgments, we are constantly being labeled and, put in little boxes, and we take that on. So we need to unplug from that conditioning so that we can show up, just as ourselves without fear of how are we going to be seen. That needs to go, and it can go. And that's another area where I love pulling from the dominatrix world, because let me tell you, as a dominatrix, the first thing you have to get comfortable when you start talking about the fact that you are or have been, you are going to be judged big time. And right,
Yeah,
in
I'm
a
sure.
massive way. So it's not just being okay with the judgment, but I take it a step further, and it's like, I want people to use that judgment as fuel, to use it to your advantage, and actually be so comfortable with you're like, bring it on. I love it. Bring it on.
Yeah, to be honest with you, that is one of the most courageous brands I've heard since I've been involved in speaking, honestly. Because
Thank you.
I kind of sit there and go, oh, okay. And I'm sure you get that. But when I hear what your thought is about it, now I understand it more, because I don't know that I've ever really sat down and talked to you about it. Because if I am okay with who I am, then who cares about the label?
Right.
Right. And I mean, obviously with our society, and not that aren't bigger problems in the world, but people judge.
We're naturally inclined to judge. And the thing is that we're not trying to change anybody from judging, because we can't.
Mm-hmm.
But we can change how we respond to it. So our conditioned response right now is to put up a big wall and trying to deflect it, which is as effective as trying to block somebody who is running at you.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how strong you are, you're not going to do that. You're both going to be bowled over. But if you instead were to, let yourself receive that judgment and just let it go on through and say, okay, thanks, that's great. And there's a long conditioning that goes with that, like in training. So I can say this, but please understand that there is some process to get there. But it's like, the difference is like, you have that person running at you, and instead of trying to block them, you move out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And they fall without you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the difference. We have to let ourselves, just be okay with it, to be able to receive it in a way that it's like, it's all good. It's just going to go right on past.
So how do you, with female executives or people that you work with,
Mm-hmm.
how do you kind of help them? And I know you said there's steps, so I know you can't cover it all.
Yeah.
How do you kind of start to harden them up in that way, right? Because sometimes, you see super confident women, and then you get to know them better, and you're like, oh my God, that it's a facade.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of things do you do, to harden? I don't know if harden
It's
up
not
is the
hard.
right.
Well, not quite. I wouldn't call it hardening up. I would actually call it softening, because we're taking the layers off.
Okay.
So the process that I do with people is very interesting, in that we look at, the judgments and what I call the energetic charge that we have on two sides of the equation. So we have in ourselves, we have this, judgment, say, of I'm not good enough. And you have, bugaboos about the fact that you think you're not good enough. And then you have bugaboos about what it would mean to actually let that go. And so it's like this polarity creating this internal conflict, and it creates a disruption. So there's this constant disruption. And the process that I take people through, which we don't have time to get into in depth, but basically it clears off the energetic charge on both sides. And then you're left with a choice. And the choice in this case would be whether or not you want to continue to judge yourself as not worthy. And if you clear off the charge that's been created around why you need to hold on to it, why that's, important, why you took it on, we clear all of those off, you're not going to naturally want to see yourself as broken or, unworthy, because your natural state, and this gets a little bit into the higher level consciousness, which I love playing with, but your natural state is to see yourself as a divine being. Mm-hmm. And in that space, there's never anything wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not scared. You're not any of those things. Mm-hmm. And so it's bringing people back around to connect with who they are authentically. And a lot of it's this process of untangling them. And once you untangle, then it's just a choice whether they move forward or not, which is what makes it easy. Mm-hmm. It's not forced. It's not, I have to do 50,000 affirmations. I don't have to, do any kind of repetition. I'm not having to lift 100 pounds at the gym before I'm ready. It becomes easy. We just remove the baggage that's there. And then they show up. They're brilliant. They're natural brilliance. So I see a lot of people who are absolutely brilliant, but it's like they've got this crusted cocoon around them. Mm-hmm. And I come along and I pull off all the layers of the cocoon. And then they're like, oh, hey, fabulous. I feel fabulous. And I'm like, well, you've been like that all along. Mm-hmm. You just were carrying some baggage. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the process is. And as we go along, then I can start to connect them a little bit more to the idea of, it's like, if you are this divine being and being willing to receive any energy, because what if energy is neither positive nor negative, right? We start to go into some of those bigger concepts, which again, the down the road.
Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating. So once you kind of get them, outside of the cocoon, then they can really start to listen naturally to who they need to be. Absolutely. Do you find because in our roles we take on so much that sometimes I'm going to say systems, that's probably not the right word, but all the responsibilities that women have actually impacts that space. To get to that space, does it make it more difficult?
Yes and no. I mean,
that was me. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, it's interesting. For a lot of times when I work with men, even though I don't, specifically market to men, but sometimes men gravitate towards me, I do find that they untangle a little faster. And I think sometimes with women, it is that feeling responsible, feeling like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm the one who's the nurturer, the caretaker. And so sometimes it's kind of, prying their fingers off of that responsibility to be everybody's nurturer and caretaker. Mm-hmm. Once that is loosened off, it's a lot easier for them to start to be what they call selfish, which is the caretaking and, letting go of the baggage and stepping into being powerful, stepping into asking for what you want, and really claiming what it is that you're good at. Those are the things that, sometimes it can take a little longer, but it doesn't have to. It still can be fairly fast to untangle from it.
Well, I'm sure, because once you I always go back to, you can't unknow once you've done all this work, right? Because now you're like, oh my goodness, maybe I have some things that push and pull at me. Maybe I'm at a certain stage. Maybe I can't do, I think of what I can do now with a 17-year-old when I was in consulting, he was 4. And there was so much I wanted to keep going, but then again, I couldn't to some degree, because then I would miss him. So I had to find that balance and get that, because I could have, but then I would have missed really, really significant things with him in the stage. So sometimes it's kind of being able to have those conversations with yourself, like, what is the goal? And, I can achieve any goal, but then is it the goal that I want at that time? Right. So I'm sure you could probably talk a lot about that with women. Now, in reference to other than mindset, what other things do you kind of pull from the dominatrix? I'm going to say model. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Archetype is what I tend to
archetype.
Yeah.
What other things do you pull into your coaching from?
So I'd say there's a really strong energy component, the woo spiritual side of things. So intuition, your gut instinct is a really big factor. And, women have this naturally, but we just fine tune that so that you're willing to actually follow it. Because, the example I always give to people is that, your intuition has never been wrong. Never. And you think about it, like there is nothing in the world that is 100% accurate other than your intuition. Now, where we get in the way is that our monkey mind, steps in there and, wants a certain outcome. And so then questions the intuition and thinking, oh no, that can't possibly be right. Or, it muddles with it. So I do an intuition boot camp training with people and get them really connected so that they're listening the way that they need to listen so they can hear the messages, and also really willing to follow it. And then what that does, of course, is that it always moves you towards where you want to go. It may not always look cognitively the right decision, but it's always leading you exactly where you need to go. And you can kind of like rest on that. That also speeds up your decision-making process. Like, you can do your decisions in 5 seconds or less. And you don't need to be, scattered and running all over the place. You can be more efficient with time. The other thing is being really present, being really mindful. And when you are present, you're in a state of relaxation, which of course we know all the health benefits, right? When we lower our stress level, when we lower that stress response, get into the relaxation response, the body goes into healing. You have deeper breathing, which gives you more oxygen, which, all the amazing benefits of being in a relaxed state. You also have more cognitive processing ability when you're in a relaxed state. So you're going to come up with more creative ideas and solutions and be able to, be there with the client and negotiate from what they want as well as what you want, and drop into that. So
it's a lot of energy and attunement.
Yes.
With the core real self, then I hear.
Yes. Yeah.
And that from there, then they can kind of project forward where they want to go based on the goals that they've come to you with.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds amazing. So the book, so tell us about the book. I know I've seen it all over, and tell me what's been going on. And I know it's done quite well since it's been released.
So we hit number one, which was
awesome.
Great. We hit number one in 3 different categories, and more so than that, people are reading the book, really connecting with the story, seeing themselves in it. These are the things that I'm hearing. It's giving them a completely different perspective on business, a way to access their mindset. And, it's just so amazing to have people say, I loved your book and it really changed my life. Like that for me is like, okay, great. It was worth the 18 months of agony that it took to write this thing. Then,
Wow.
Yeah.
So people are looking at it and they're really gaining stuff from it.
They are, because it's very packed with tools. It's not just my story, but I've packed in practical tools of, that people can apply, use in their life, get these, processes going to get started on really claiming your inner dominatrix.
What was that experience like for you writing the book? Because so much of it was personal, I'm
yes.
sure. And obviously you're blending today. Prepare to write the book? Like, how did you have a certain ritual? You said it took 18 months.
Yeah, it was a bit haphazard. I would do it differently looking back because it's always easy to see hindsight. But for me, I had a general plan of what I wanted to cover in the book. And I always kept in mind, the reader. That was who I was writing this for. It was the person who was going to be reading the book. And so when I was figuring out what stories I wanted to include and, what aspects I wanted to share, it was always like, why do I want to tell this person the story? Mm-hmm. How do I tie that in? And, why it took me so long, because, the actual writing process, I probably could have done in a month. But I would write a chapter and then, have to take some time to actually process with me. I'd go and get some sessions and work through, am I willing to share this? Is this a story that is really valuable? Is it going to be too much? And it went through a lot of edits because I wanted to make sure that the stories were there that created impact, but not so much that they were traumatizing, because that's not the point. It's not to be sensational. It's just to give people a flavor of it without being shocking and, jarring. So I one editor, poor thing, she was like, "Oh my God, you have to change this. This is a little extreme. You might trigger people." So I'm like, okay. So I went through a lot of rewrites on the book to take it deeper, to make it more succinct, to make it more concrete, and bring the language in. So it was a really good learning process for me all the way through that, and I'm very proud of it. It's a very good. It's
book. It's like your baby, right? Like, I mean, I remember when I wrote mine. Yeah. It's like, you're like, oh my God, and you get your box and you're like opening it up and you're like, oh my goodness, this has actually happened. It's such a process and such an achievement, right? Like, obviously, and then like you said, if someone were to kind of hear the brand, they would think that's sensationalism, but it's not, right? And I think to do it well, to your point, you had to take care of yourself too, right? Because how much of this really do you want to share with the world, right? And I'm sure there's parts of it that it's nobody's business. Right. And then if it marries into some of the great things that you share with your coaching clients, and when you speak, that's a whole other thing, because that now you're giving back a gift of a concept that most people won't. Obviously, they'll probably read about it, like we said, but they may not experience it. But to a lesser degree, having someone be so open about the strengths of it, because oftentimes we may not look at it as from a strength based.
Yeah. Right? It takes courage to share your story. It's pretty easy to write. Actually, this is my second book. The first book was very easy. It's a book of tools, right? It's a page-a-day book of tools, really easy. I wasn't risking anything. This one, I have risked so much. And some of the stories, as I was writing them, I'm like, wow, okay, people are actually going to read this. I want them to know this.
Right.
But there's a point to all of the stories. I don't share them just to be, hitting that, ooh, look, that's sensational.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've been asked lots of different interesting questions about the book. What's one of the most interesting questions that you've been asked about the book that you can think of?
I think we've kind of touched on a lot of it, because people are fascinated with the story, and it amazes me how many people say to me, were you actually a dominatrix? Right? They're like, were you actually? I'm like, people would fake this? Like, I'm going to put this out here just because,
I'm not sure you can fake that, because
you can't fake it. Like, really, and you ask that of me, like, I don't know. So that's kind of funny. Plus, why would you go for a topic? I mean, I can't even boost a post on Facebook because it's got the word dominatrix, right? So there are a lot of challenges with this. I don't think.
Oh, is it? Wow.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that until recently, but it's like, oh, great. But yeah, that's one that always surprises me. Were you actually? And it's like, yes, I was actually, because apparently, who was it? Gloria Steinem. She was a stripper very, very briefly. And apparently she wrote a book about being a stripper. And so somebody referenced that, and she said, were you actually a dominatrix, or was it like with Gloria Steinem, she was a stripper for 5 minutes and then wrote a book about it? And I'm like, no, I've integrated this. Don't worry.
What I find fascinating, and even away from the business perspective, more on the story perspective, that so many people have stories, right? And they're so afraid to tell them, right? If someone's listening and they have a story, Dana, and they're thinking, oh my God, I don't know, I may tip, but what would people think?
Mhm.
All that, I'm sure you went through all those iterations of things.
Absolutely.
What
Yeah.
would you,
And I
what would you tell them? Is there a process you went through before you decided, or what kind
um
of advice would you give to someone to say, if you're going to make a difference, I'm sure
yeah.
that was the biggest thing, to make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. And I'd say if you're planning on sharing your story, so either through a book or on the stage or, even in a group setting and you're wanting the story to make an impact, you need to be done with your story. You need to be over it, and so that you can tell the story without reliving it and becoming highly emotional. So you need to be through it, and you need to be through it in a way that you see the gifts that have come from it. So, in my story, I have had sexual abuse in my past, and I have gotten to the point where I see the gift. I would not be the coach and the healer that I am today if it wasn't for that. I would have loved to have gotten the gift a different way, but I see the gifts from it. So you have to be that far along that you can look back and go, wow, what a gift. When you're at that point, it'll be easier for you to tell your story because you have to take people through the whole journey to the healing, to the outcome. And then I would really encourage people, if you're going to go professional with it, speaking or writing, work with somebody. Get somebody to
Mhm.
help you craft that message and pull out what is it about your story. I mean, I've had I think 4 different speaker trainers at this point help me with the messaging, help me with, my performance. And I've worked with book coaches and writing coaches to help me craft all of this. And because when you're really up close and personal with it, especially when it's a painful story, you need that objective
Mhm.
perspective, and you need the objective perspective that can say, what if you tell it this way?
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I worked with complex PTSD. It's one of my specialties.
Mm,
And I can truly tell you that you saying that it's a gift um, will touch a lot of people's lives, because so many
mm,
people that I have worked with, or it impacts things at such a profound level, right?
yeah,
So to be able to get to a point where now you can look back as a gift, it shows like how much you have put it into perspective, because that's not who you were. It's something that happened to you, and it takes a lot. And so many women in the world have experienced this, of course, with everything that has come out. So
hmm,
I think that in of itself, saying that it's a gift, shows me the extent of your healing and where you have worked through it.
thank you.
And then you're writing through it again.
Yes.
So being able to care for yourself is going to trigger things, but to be
Hmm.
so, concurrently, you're obviously, you come first. If you, I mean, what's the book or the brand or all those things if there's no Dana? So
Right.
doing that in a I would say a kind, caring way for yourself first really is the part that I see as being so important, which obviously you've done that.
Thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you honoring that.
Yeah, I know, because I, like I said, with it being one of my specialties, and
Hmm.
seeing the impact of it on people's lives, just even people listening to this that have been touched, and we know, how
Absolutely.
many people that in of itself, I think, when you talk more about it and people recognize it, that
Yeah.
gift that you give people to recognize that anything is possible, you are not defined from what happened,
No.
you can rise out of it and create something like this. So I think that's thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I just want to, for the listener, that it's like, if you're not at the point where this could possibly be a gift, whatever your story is, don't rush it.
Hmm.
Keep doing healing work, and it comes naturally. It's not something you force. It's not something you have to impose on yourself. It comes from that deeper level healing. And it just bubbles up where it's like, wow, if I didn't have that happen, I wouldn't have been able to do XYZ. And it's there whenever it comes.
Hmm. You have control to decide how it's going to go,
Yeah.
and you decide when and if it comes out in the world.
Hmm.
Now, Dana, I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions, and people will probably want to connect with you, and you know where to get the book, all those things, or even if there's where people can reach you for speaking events. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find the book, and if they needed to reach out to you for either coaching or speaking, where they can do that.
Thank you. I think the best resource is innerdominatrix.com. That'll get you the book. It'll get you links to, a bunch of resources, free resources, tons of freebies. And then anything you need as far as contacting me for speaking or coaching is available there as well.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Now I know more, right? Other than our flashes that we see in our meetings. And I know we'll be in a meeting again next week. So, again, time I do a podcast, I gain. And today I can honestly say that mindset is everything. Mm-hmm. And I think in the business world, we hear it all the time, but this takes it to a different profound level, in my opinion, because it really takes something that scares the living bejesus out of a lot of people and looks at the strength that it creates when you take control over where you see things in your life, especially as women. And then, deferring the, I'm not good enough, I can't do it, that's not for me, to really get into that whole mindset or that model that Dana's talking about, I'm impressed, to be able to walk in with that confidence, which takes so many of us so long to be able to achieve, really, as we go. So, Dana, thank you again for being with us. And for anyone wanting to get a hold of Dana, please go ahead, like she said, with her contact information. And myself, if you're wanting more information on authenticity, and getting connected to yourself and in relationships, you can go to roxannederhodge.com/blueprint, where you could download a free course. So take care, everyone, and we'll chat with you soon. Take care, Dana.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.